Welcome to the Revolution Insight series. This is going to be a special episode that is revolving around an interview with Whitney Webb and Hedges. And it's important that you guys know that this is a revolution. When we talk about Revolution Insight, we're not going to go over everything. This was a great interview. I think it was about 45 minutes long. I highly recommend it. It's just an explosive combination when you got those two in an interview, and I honestly just had to cover it at least as soon as possible, honestly. Now, with the insight here, what I gained is this idea of Poindexter being the real foundation for surveillance, the surveillance state, and mass surveillance in general. This was interesting. I knew that J. Edgar Hoover was involved in the expansion of the surveillance state, but I didn't quite have Poindexter on my radar as of before this interview, but it's definitely something to note, and it's important to realize. I think these guys progress. Right, you rarely start off with nothing, and when it came down to Poindexter, I think it tells us a lot, because this is really starting the foundation for what we have today. And when I say what we have today, I really do mean literally. Palantir, for those who don't know what Palantir is, it's essentially you're looking at the private arm of the CIA, basically. If we just wanted to broad stroke it and have people really get a decent insight into what Palantir is. Palantir had literally reached out to Poindexter, and this particular program, it appears that it was instrumental in forming Palantir in general. And this idea of Poindexter, I think, was interesting because it showed that the progression into and how important it was even into the age of Palantir. And the Palantir in general, like I said, the most accurate understanding with broad strokes is just understanding it as the private arm of the CIA. But you need to understand that the CIA needs a private arm because the CIA does Big Brother things. It's not this isn't. They don't really color in the lines. I've heard one particular description of the CIA was essentially a shadow government within the government that would allow for experimentation without the constraints of just that would be really that we'd really uphold as a democratic society. So, for instance, when it comes down to competing with China or Russia and things of that nature, this is a lot of the this really gives insight into the excuses behind Palantir and the CIA in general, but Palantir and why they would need a private arm and private way to actually expand what they want to do. To be honest, we just do monstrous things when it comes down to this idea of competing with people like Russia and China and things of that nature. But it's definitely something in terms of the way that we actually justify these particular programs still in existence today. Like I said, Palantir basically the private arm of the CIA. For those that don't know, the InQtel, which is the investment branch of the CIA, that was their only client for about 6 years, or their primary client. I'm not sure if it was their only client per se, but Whitney mentions this, and that's really important for us to understand, because people hear Palantir, people like Alex Jones say things, that are just clownish, honestly, about Palantir being the small AI company that's battling the big dogs. It's actually something to see. I think just seeing these people, a lot of these independent people come up and then sell out and being able to see them both come up and sell out in real time is really something. And they obviously got popular by being a voice of reason and being that particular someone trustworthy. So it is interesting to see them throw it all away at this point. But another thing about this particular insight that we gained here was PayPal also consulted with a quote-unquote every three-letter agency within the government during forming. So Peter Thiel is we need to understand that these guys, when we talk about these guys, this is CIA, right? This is and thank God that they're just so people like Peter Thiel are so disconnected that they would get up on podcasts and still talk and try to be normal in front of everybody, because it is I'm actually more fearful when we don't see them, honestly. But we need to understand that finance is important, economics is important. We talked about that in terms of with the episodes that are coming out. I think it was the episode with Andy in particular was really important. But finance is so crucial when it comes down to revolution, especially today. Okay, because like I said before, it's not going to be the revolution isn't going to look like a whole bunch of people out in the streets with AKs and and weapons of that nature. We're going to need to be intelligent about how we really go about things. It's not going to look the same. So we need to figure out what it means. What are our weapons today? And a lot of this really does revolve around the idea of these people that we get information from. They need to be understood. You need to understand that a lot of these independent media guys out here now, or these independent media guys that you actually trust, you need to really picture them as your front line, right? Your soldiers on the front line in terms of actually getting and being able to arm you and really being able to cut through the mess. And it's important that you understand that, because people like Tim Pool, they I believe it was Tenet Media, that it was a scandal where he was actually being paid by the Russian government, and you have also this scandal with Chorus coming on the more democratic side, but that's an immediate disqualification. After that it should be, when you have an understanding that these are your frontline soldiers and you find out that they're taking money from other entities, it's a problem. It's not a problem that you can overlook. When you're able to sell out to that extent, it is over. That needs to be well understood. In a more ideal society, these guys will be working at McDonald's after that. That's just how it is. But when it comes down to PayPal, you have this idea of economics or whatever coming in, right? What does a revolution look like now if we are reliant on the pay systems? That's a significant piece. That's a significant chunk of power that we will never get back. And that is when it came down to those protests that were happening with the truckers in Canada, or I'm not sure exactly the details behind it, but the fact that they were able to freeze funds is tremendously worrisome, and is monstrous, clownish. Is what's going on today with this particular administration. Is we need to understand that what we had before was essentially people or entities that were less bullish but more competent in how they were able to essentially turn up the heat without us noticing. If you follow the analogy of really the boiling, trying to boil a frog in a pot, if you turn the heat up too high, then it'll jump out. But if you turn it up just a tad bit and you kind of make sure that it stays comfortable, it'll die in that pot, and it'll boil to death. And that's what that's what I think we were looking at with, honestly, with the Democratic Party. So it's definitely something, and it's definitely something that we need to really pay attention to. This idea of fear is another concept that is consistently coming up. The Total Information Act after 2000, after the terrorist attacks, that was insane. What they were doing, they had Edward Snowden released a book, I believe it was called Permanent Record, and this idea of what was taking place in the government, in the actual, what they were actually going out there and doing. They had entire offices in phone data centers or phone companies or something. They had entire offices to where they could filter everyone's phone calls through. It wasn't discriminatory, right? We need to understand that. It was not discriminatory. And when we talk about total surveillance, we need to understand something. These people aren't trying to make you safer, right? More surveillance does not equal more safety and security, okay? It's important that you understand. Jeffrey Epstein was he was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, okay? They want to make sure that crime is something that only the rich can afford. They have special economic zones where crime is infamous for crime. These people are very much depraved. You won't be you think that, we have nothing to hide. The level of the degradation of the morality that actually rules your government, you need to not be disillusioned by that, right? The people who make it to the top are the people that can be held to who can be bribed. The people who are blackmailed. These are the people who make it to the top. They need to be controlled. So that's a bit of a tangent, maybe a bit of a tangent. But another thing is they actually had a gambling mechanism on terrorism, which is it is insane. I did not know that they would even dare to do this, but it got no attention during the Total Information Awareness Act. But these people were gambling about where terrorist attacks would take place, when they would take place, and things of that nature. And that was something that didn't get attention, and it's on my list now in terms of things to look at. But that is definitely worrisome to think that this was a market of some kind. And another thing was healthcare was an important piece of surveillance, and this was back before the before the pandemic. So we have entities that are very much involved in increasing surveillance through the usage of healthcare, right? This idea of safety and security, they know that that's the theme, right, in terms of when it comes down to provoking fear and expanding the surveillance state. Safety, providing safety and security is a great mask of civility, as I really like. I've heard it from Chris Hedges. I'm not sure if he got it from anybody, but I like that particular term because that's exactly what it is. And this is what we're looking at in terms of what's happening today, because for those that don't know, these fitness tracking apps, there was at some point these guys were a bit disconnected from reality. These guys were able to essentially, or I'm pretty sure they listed this, but the idea is they were able to list or track when a person was having sex on an app, right? So whoever has access to that information, which is another interesting note, is who has access to that information, because Google Play Store, you would think that they would have some kind of filter to make sure that apps are more secure, and to be honest with you, it may be the exact opposite in that case. Even with this whole there was some kind of investigation with Trump, and there was withholding from the investigation because they didn't want it known in terms of how much they were able to essentially gather, and that is very sickening and very worrisome. If you're interested in that particular topic, Brian Tao has a good book on that, or Byron Tao, and it's called The Means of Control, I believe. Now, speaking of our good friend Epstein, he was actually very much interested in watching people. He was interested in a ton of things, and I think people really misunderstand that. The actual Ghislaine Maxwell had a program that she was able to speak about at the UN, and even threatened not to give votes to people in the UN. It was very sickening to see that in the UN, and very interesting in general, but I'm not going to go off on another tangent there. They also talk about the idea and the concept of Space Force, and that being connected to this idea of Tesla. And this is from another article that's on Unlimited Hangouts from a journalist, an investigative journalist that's with Whitney Webb, or that's working with Whitney Webb in some capacity. His name is Ian, and it's interesting because it's not mentioned in this interview, but there's a concept called orbital weapons, right, to gain advantage and to make modern warfare completely inert. People need to understand that these people are sick, very sick. These aren't mentally stable people, and they are extremely sick. When it comes down to Peter Thiel being good friends and being directly connected to Elon Musk and weapons in space, these people being able to gain their little freedom cities, as they're being called by the current administration, but they have a lot of other names. It's 15-minute cities, right? They rebranded to make it basically they basically rename it, but it's the same concept. That concept in itself, though, what people really probably haven't heard as much about is that it is connected to the concept of orbital weaponry, superior weapons. They want to make modern warfare inert. They want to make sure that there is no conflict. It doesn't exist. And who programs the AI? The people who design the people who are connected to the weapons. It is. It's This is like Darth Vader, Sith Lord, like level conspiracy we're really witnessing, honestly. But it's definitely something. And they mentioned Space Force. I forgot why they mentioned Space Force, but I do remember that there was talk about Tesla, and that made me really think about the orbital weaponry from Ian's article about the city-states. I also have a video on that, so check that out. It's not a part of the Revolution Insight series, but it is something. Also, ICE is it's a pre-crime pilot. I'm gonna try not to go off on another tangent here, but it's connected to Palantir. Okay, Palantir is connected to the CIA. Okay, there is an element. It may not exist ubiquitous through all of the operations with ICE yet, but there is a very much an interest that is CIA. This what we're seeing today, there are aspects of this that are CIA backed, deep state sanctioned behavior in a lot of these particular situations. I don't think all of them, because I think there'd be a lot more confidence if you know, in terms of the way a lot of this stuff is carried out. But when we're talking about what's happening today, it's important that you understand the deep state is not letting this stuff go to waste. They're not letting this opportunity go to waste. There's very real things happening under the surface. Another thing is the idea of ICE, what was happening with ICE in terms of gathering information. What sets China apart in terms of the social credit score system, why they're so sophisticated, is the idea of profiling, right? They had a lot of background in profiling people and information, and gaining and gathering information on people. That's what sets, because China apparently isn't the only country that's interested in social credit scores, but they are very sophisticated in how they are profiling and able to profile people. They haven't quite used, there's a lot of talk about China being the big bad boogeyman, and they haven't quite became the big bad boogeyman in terms of total surveillance yet. But their capability, it is very scary and a looming threat. Also, this idea of the smart wall that's going on, there's also mention about that. The smart wall is a two-way street. That's something that was interesting about it. Like I said, I highly recommend the interview in itself, because this is insight, and I really want to make sure you guys understand that it's this idea of it being brought about a two-way street, letting people in the country, but also letting people leave the country. You guys need to understand, if there's ever a draft, if there's ever anything to worry about regarding a draft, you will not be able to escape the same way that they were able to do in Vietnam. They will lower the bar enough to where those people who are quote unquote autistic and all of these things, yeah, they're still gonna go. Like they are thinking about that. They're making sure that there's more aggression towards getting women in the draft. They're making sure that these things are going to essentially become being thought about and really developed in terms of this new system that's going and taking place. These are things that don't get attention. The last note here I had was the border zone. Whitney Webb talks about this. I've seen this before. I've seen this particular idea before, but the border zone is interesting because this concept of the border, what's happening, securing the border and all that stuff, it's not really common sense. It's not rooted in common sense in terms of where the border is. right? Because you would think, like, oh, okay, well, yeah, those lines on the map would be where the border is. No. When we talk about the border is more than that. And when we talk about the border, it is subject to a different set of laws. When it comes down to what's able to happen on the border versus what is able to happen within society, it's different. And when it comes down to defining that border, it is extending further into the United States than you or I would really venture to guess based on looking at a map. Okay. Very interesting stuff, and extremely highly, like, when these two got together, I was like, oh my goodness, like it's like I knew I was missing something. I think I look at both of these guys, I'm just like, oh, this is great. But you should definitely check out the interview and like this whole series. This is really giving insight into the revolution idea, but I am particularly interested in giving you guys insight in the framework of I'm releasing and I'm creating this work now in terms of this idea of it's a story, and right now it's the first piece of this story is likely going to come out in the framework of a comic or a manga, and I want to really start to kind of put ideas out there through the comic and the manga, and also just tell a really beautiful or tell a really great story. I really would appreciate, one, just liking, subscribing would be nice, 2, commenting, 3, you guys can check out. I'm gonna update you guys when the one shot is available, or update the channel. And also for there's going to be a particular pocket watch that I'm going to try to make available in the link in the description, but you may really only have the real understanding and the value behind it after you see the one shot, after you see the actual manga and you're exposed to it a little bit more. But in any case, it's going to I think it's going to be a good, I'm fairly confident that it's going to be a good story, and I'm not going to tell you guys how long I worked on it. That doesn't really matter. What matters is how good it is, how appealing it is, how aesthetic and great the actual story tells, and how impactful it is. So I'm really hoping that it speaks for itself. So if anything, that's going to be the end of this particular episode, and really hope to see you guys soon. Thank you.